morning, everybody. We had
now.
over 16,000 people come forward and get tested, but we're really keen to elevate those testing numbers. Overnight to 8 p.m, we had 3 cases, all of which are directly linked to the Avalon cluster, all of which are already in isolation, which is positive news. However, overnight since 8 p.m, we have had a couple of cases where we haven't yet established those links to the Avalon cluster. They're cases outside of the Northern Beaches, one of which is from Wollongong. So I'm not ruling out that they're somehow not linked to the Avalon cluster. That case from Wollongong had been in Sydney. However, until those links are established, all of us in Greater Sydney have to be on high alert, including residents of Wollongong. So I say that in order to encourage as many people as possible across the state, even if you live in the regions, even if you live in Greater Sydney, if you have the mildest of symptoms, please come forward and get tested. Because we know how contagious this virus is. And now that we've had a couple of cases come in since 8 p.m, outside of the Northern Beaches, that's always a cause for concern and validates the advice the health experts have been giving government, in that we want to make sure that we've locked down all those potential chains of transmission which may have been previously missed. So can I urge everybody to please come forward and get tested, no matter whether you have the mildest of symptoms, no matter if you haven't been to a so-called hotspot, even if you haven't been to a venue where someone's been infected, someone that you've been in close contact with may have been to one of those venues or may have undertaken an activity which has put them at risk of having acquired the virus. So all of us across the state have to be on high alert, and we really need to get those testing numbers up. So can I please encourage everybody to do so? I also again want to turn our attention to the residents of Northern Beaches and thank them for their patience. We appreciate frustration levels may be increasing, but please know there is light at the end of the tunnel. Ironically, as we see time move on, the threat in Greater Sydney is almost becoming as equal to parts of the Northern Beaches, and that's where we'll be adjusting potentially some of our restrictions. And I say especially to people in the southern part of the Northern Beaches, please know there'll be relief for you on the 3rd of January. We'll be able to tell you exactly what that relief looks like on the 2nd of January. And for the people in the northern part of the Northern Beaches, we're asking you to stay in your current situation till the 9th of January, and we appreciate how frustrating it is for you. And I want to especially give a shout out to small businesses across the Northern Beaches. We know you're hurting. We know this is a time of year when you'd be welcoming many tourists from outside the area. And please know the government is considering its options in relation to how we can provide some support to you. Please keep trading. Please, local residents, as was suggested yesterday, use your local businesses for takeaway rather than cooking at home. Utilise those local businesses for your New Year's Eve meal. Please make sure you do everything you can to support those local businesses. I know communities are already, but we just want everyone to keep trading, and government will be here to consider all the options as to how we can better support you in the coming days and potentially weeks. I also want to stress to everybody to please respect the rules we've put in place for New Year's Eve. Assistant Commissioner Willing is here today from the New South Wales Police Force to further provide updates on not only how police presence will be increasing, but also contact the police have had with local government and other organisations to make sure everybody is very clear on their obligations. But I also want to say this, there is also a level of personal responsibility. Yes, government can put in the rules. Yes, police can enforce them. But it also comes down to what each of us do. Each of us know by now what is COVID safe and what isn't. Hopefully everybody is very clear now on what the restrictions are for New Year's Eve and what our expectations are. So I just ask everybody to also exercise good personal responsibility and good common sense. And we're really appealing to everybody to do that. And can I stress again how grateful we are that the people of New South Wales have responded in such a positive way to what we've been asking people to do. We are still at a very critical phase of the response. So every day that goes by, we learn a bit more about what this outbreak has been doing and what it could do in the next few weeks. And so we don't want people to think we're out of the woods, far from it. Every time we get a couple of cases overnight which aren't directly yet linked to the Northern Beaches, that gives us concern. I'm not suggesting those links won't finally be established, but whilst they're under investigation. They came in very late at night last night. The contact tracers are working overtime. But until those links are formally established, if they're established, all of us in Greater Sydney and in Greater New South Wales for that matter have to be on high alert, especially given there was a case of a Wollongong person who was in Sydney and has been tested positive. So we really need to be on high alert. I'll ask Dr. Kerry to give an update, then Assistant Commissioner Willing will give a police update, and then we'll take any of your questions. Thank you.
So New South Wales recorded 3 new locally acquired cases of COVID to the 24 hours to 8 p.m. All 3 were linked to the Avalon cluster, which now numbers 129. And pleasingly, all of those cases were in isolation for their full infectious period. However, as the Premier has indicated, we received 1 notification very late last night and a couple of notifications this morning of cases that have presented for testing that are not immediately linked to the cluster. Our investigations are ongoing and we may well establish those links, but I think this highlights to the broader community of New South Wales that there shouldn't be complacency. No matter what symptoms, however mild, please present for testing. Whilst many weeks ago I would have been happy with 16,329 tests in a 24-hour period, for me now I want to see those numbers pushed up well over the 20 to 30,000. By having those really high rates of testing for those people that have got symptoms, that will give us the greatest assurance we're not missing those transmission events, particularly outside that Northern Beaches area. In terms of the Darwin to Qantas, Sydney Qantas flight, I can confirm that all test results of passengers and crew on this flight have been negative to date. But as you are aware, we do isolate those close contacts for 14 days, and they will be tested on exit screening as well. In relation to the Griffith flight, as you recall, a person who flew from Sydney to Griffith on Monday the 21st of December was confirmed last week as having COVID, and remember that the person flew before they knew they were a close contact of a case and did nothing wrong. But all passengers on that flight have now been tested and returned negative results, and they must complete their isolation periods despite having these negative results. Again, we are doing a lot of exit screening, so this means that as we release people from those close contacts, we are asking people to get tested. So our close contact team will be prompting you. Please, thank you very much for doing that. That gives us the added assurance we're not missing those very mild infections, and gives us a better picture of the situation, particularly in the Northern Beaches area. In terms of the messages about what we should do to keep COVID safe over the new year, the outdoor gathering limit is set at 50, and clearly outdoor settings are much safer. But we are urging everyone to apply common sense. Limit your movements, limit your gatherings, only meet with those people that are essential to meet with. This will assist us, if there are any undetected chains of transmission, ensure that we don't have a super spreading event. So please do not go out and about if you have the mildest of symptoms. Stay home. Your friends and family will understand, and that is the prudent course of action. Please ensure that when you're out and about, you have your hand sanitizer with you, you maintain that social distancing, and when you're in those indoor environments in particular, please wear a mask. This will keep us safe and help us control the spread of COVID.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As we do every year, police this year will be launching a significant operation to ensure that this year's New Year's Eve celebrations are safe, particularly COVID safe, and as enjoyable as possible for everyone. So police for some time now have been working with stakeholders, landholders and other government agencies, including local government, to develop plans to ensure that this year's New Year's Eve goes as safely and as enjoyable as it possibly can. You will see large numbers of police officers out and about in uniform and from specialist commands patrolling the greater metropolitan area like we always would during every other New Year's Eve celebration to date. So officers will be out and about in commands across the metropolitan area. I just wanted to re-emphasise that. Of course, the Sydney CBD area will be different this year. The 2 zones that have been declared will be policed by police officers. If you don't have a New Year's Eve pass, do not go and try and get into the green zone. police officers will be equipped with powers under the health order to move people on should they be congregating in numbers that are unsafe. But I must stress, we need the community to abide by the current health orders, particularly in relation to public gatherings and household gatherings. Now, in terms of the operation itself, the operation we run from the Police Operations Centre alongside the Government Coordination Centre in Surrey Hills. It will be coordinated as a statewide operation. We have resources that have been reallocated back out to regional areas and greater metropolitan areas to provide a flexible response, and we are confident that we can deal with anything that arises. At this point, I have to say it, any antisocial behaviour or inappropriate behaviour will be dealt with like we normally would on a New Year's Eve operation itself. So again, I'm asking people to use common sense, understand the current health orders. Do not come into the city unless you have to, unless you have a New Year's Eve pass, and restrict your movements. But the operation itself will be a flexible one. We'll be able to move resources around to deal with anything that should arise.
Dr. Chan, what could you tell us about the two new cases that emerged overnight? The person from Wollongong, which parts of Sydney have they been to? Have they been to the Northern Beaches at all?
So look, those investigations are ongoing. We believe that they had spent some time in the central business district or the centre of the city, but again, it's premature. We thought it was critically important to let the public know about that, because the numbers overnight were actually very reassuring that we had those 3 cases and they were all in isolation. This highlights how the situation can change quite rapidly, and that's why we're mentioning those cases. But those interviews are occurring as we speak now, and we will release in the usual way if those people have been in any venues, and we will issue information about any upstream investigations that we're undertaking. I suspect that will be later today.
And where is the other person from?
So there are a couple of cases that have come overnight. So there is 3 cases that we're currently investigating. One of them is the Wollongong case. There's one from the inner west, and there is one from the sort of northern area. And we're just looking at, we haven't ruled out that there's established links for one of those cases. But as I said, literally 2 of those notifications came in this morning from the laboratory, and one came in at around 10:30 or so last night. And can I just express my gratitude to all of the people for taking those calls, answering questions, compiling lists, and also we are going to be undertaking rapid testing and asking those individuals to present for testing urgently, and that cooperation assists us better understand. So often we have a period where we don't understand the linkages, but by later in the afternoon we're hoping with the cooperation of those individuals that we'll end up having a better picture. But we will release any information that's relevant for the public to respond to straight away.
You mentioned the Northern Beaches, the businesses that are struggling. This is their high season right now. So obviously you're considering stuff going forward. That clearly means some degree of compensation or a compensation package. You may not be ready to announce it yet, but broad brush, what would that entail?
Oh, look, people just need to look at how we've supported businesses in other parts of the state during the pandemic to give people a sense of what that might look like, whether it was our border communities during the Victoria-New South Wales border closure, or when it was providing some direct assistance to smaller businesses during the early stages of the pandemic. We're considering those options. It'll be what we're looking at is similar to what's already been provided to businesses across the state. And my strongest message to the small business community on the Northern Beaches is we appreciate the pain and frustration you're going through. We're encouraging the community to support you, and the anecdotal information we have is that the community is going above and beyond to support local businesses, and we want to encourage people to keep trading, to say that the New South Wales Government is considering how we can support you, and we want to encourage you to keep trading. And especially in the southern part of the Northern Beaches, we are anticipating providing relief on the 3rd of January. So there's only a few days to hang out, and especially also for the northern part of the northern beaches, it'll only be another week or so before you'll be able to get some relief as well, we anticipate. So we're just asking businesses to appreciate that we're thinking of them, that we're considering the best way to support them, and that there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. As I said in my previous remarks, and as Dr. Chanthe has highlighted, the risk at Greater Sydney and Greater New South Wales is almost as high as the southern bit of the northern beaches. Not quite there yet, but obviously that is something for us to consider. So I'm asking everybody across the state to be on high alert. You might think you're in a remote part of New South Wales or in a regional community, but you may unwittingly have been with someone who's been to another part of the state where you could have acquired the virus. So please be on your toes, be on high alert, everybody, and please come forward and get tested with the mildest of symptoms. That is the strong message for this morning. Dr. Chanthe has highlighted the fact that we'd like to see the moderate levels of testing go back into the high levels of testing. We're deeply grateful that record numbers of people came out in the days leading up to and on Christmas Day itself. And we want to see those numbers go up again, because the high rates of testing give us better confidence that we're closing all those opportunities for missing a strain of the virus.
Sydney being the same as the northern beaches, are you considering stay-at-home orders?
Not at this stage. Not at this stage, and we won't impose anything on our citizens unless we absolutely have to. So we're not there yet, but the higher rates of testing will give us greater confidence not to have to consider anything further for Greater Sydney. So the higher rates of testing will give us confidence that we are getting on top of any of those cases. And look, it's always a bit concerning when you've just been notified about a positive result outside of the northern beaches, and so the contact tracers are working overtime to try and establish those links. And as Dr. Chanthe said, hopefully by the mid-afternoon there's better information available, and certainly we'll be updating the community tomorrow morning at this time.
Just on the northern beaches, people who went to the wedding in what would you say to those people, and who are the rest of the people in northern beaches?
That is exactly the type of behaviour that risks it for everybody, and police have acted swiftly in finding people. But I think all of us were just shaking our heads absolutely aghast that occurred. We appreciate that those milestone events are very special times for people, but please consider the greater risk that you're posing to every person in New South Wales and also to the broader community of our nation. And New South Wales has a responsibility to continue to do well, to allow our economy to stay as open as possible, and that's exactly the strategy we've adopted. But we're not going to compromise public safety, and we want to make sure everybody does the right thing, but all of us will have shaking our heads, and I want to commend the police for acting swiftly in finding those people. And please know that if you do the wrong thing, you will get caught, especially when it's so brazen as to do that.
Premier, the World Health Organisation just said overnight that the vaccines being rolled out now are unlikely to eradicate the virus, meaning that even vaccinated travellers could require hotel quarantine. What is the plan for New South Wales with hotel quarantine going into the new year, given that is...
Yeah, I've always said, and I appreciate various health experts and around the nation and overseas have been providing optimistic assessments or realistic assessments about when a vaccine will be made available. But I want to make it very clear to the people of New South Wales that as the Premier and as the government, we're acting as though there is no vaccine available. We have to think about how we all live in a COVID-safe way, because even when there is a vaccine available, having it eventually rolled out to everybody is a question mark. There are various strains of the virus, which is a question mark. Some vaccines are better than others in terms of stopping you actually giving the virus to other people. Even though it protects you, you might still be able to give it to others depending on the type of vaccine. So there's still a lot of question marks around the vaccine. Our responsibility, my responsibility as the leader of New South Wales, is to provide support to our citizens to live in a COVID-safe way until the pandemic is over one way or another. There's no doubt we should feel optimistic about the rollout of the vaccines and the protection it does offer parts of our community. But until such time that everybody is vaccinated, or the vast majority are, and we know that it's effective in preventing transmissibility, we have to keep all of our settings in place, including fundamentally our quarantine system. We will maintain that. Can I give the public that assurance? I am not comfortable with having anybody outside the quarantine system who's come here from overseas. So if you're here from overseas, we expect that 14-day isolation. And of course, what we have been doing in New South Wales is providing on a daily basis, we have between 5,000 and 6,000 people in hotels, supervised by our police force, supervised by our health officials, to make sure we keep the broader community safe.
Premier, have you heard from Cricket Australia about the Sydney test?
Well, I've actually spoken to the chair of Cricket Australia this morning. I think they're making their decision at around 11:30 this morning. Can I say, I don't want to take words out of their mouth, but they provided feedback to me to say that they've been very positive and very optimistic about the way in which we've been dealing with them as the New South Wales government. They did say they were concerned about the Queensland government's position and what that meant for their players once they finished the test here and went to Queensland. So can I please assure the community that we've been given advice from the health experts as to how to run a safe test. We've provided that information to Cricket Australia. The chair has been effusive in his comments in relation to the interaction he's had with our government. We're keen to see the test stay in Sydney, obviously, but we can't control what other state governments do. That's outside our hands. But we've also assured Cricket Australia that they'll be supported to make sure the event they put on is COVID safe, and the advice we provide is the best available.
How many people would you envisage doing this?
The advice, and I don't think Dr. Chant minds me providing this, but the advice we've been given is that 50% capacity is COVID safe, so long as it's ticketed and seated and people have various other COVID safe plans in place. Cricket Australia appreciates that, respects that, and is comfortable with that. Their main concern is really what happens with the Queensland government in relation to the players, and they're the concerns they have to weigh up. But we are really keen to keep it here. They're really pleased with the plans we've put forward, but it's out of our hands, given it's really the Queensland government that's creating a bit of difficulty for them.
To the border restrictions, in that if the players come to Sydney, they will not be allowed.
Exactly, unless there's some kind of bubble arrangement, and they're the issues that have been considered. But I'm sure there'll be more updates during the day, better than I've presented to you this morning. I'll be extremely disappointed, and we've been working around the clock to support Cricket Australia. We've certainly done the best we can do, and they have as well, but there are also issues beyond our control. And I've said from the beginning that it's, in every state government makes its own decisions, but sometimes you need to consider on compassionate grounds what it means for others, and I ask all governments to do that.
Border issues. Have you heard any problems in terms of healthcare? There were border issues between Queensland and New South Wales earlier about hospitals. Have you heard of any issues since the borders are...
I haven't. I've actually had barely any communication in relation to those issues, and remember, they're decisions of other governments. They're not the New South Wales government's decision. The New South Wales government would prefer open borders throughout Australia for the duration of the pandemic. That's always been our position, and as we've demonstrated to date, we do have capacity in New South Wales to get on top of things to date, because it's extremely volatile, and I don't want to speak too soon, but certainly I hope we've been able to demonstrate that border issues shouldn't really be there unless they absolutely have to be. And we just ask all governments to consider the decisions they take on compassionate grounds. And I think people have already suffered enough regarding Christmas and New Year's in terms of not being able to be reunited with families, and the feedback we're getting from tourism operators in all states is that everybody is suffering in terms of jobs and the economy as well. So I think they're all issues we need to turn our attention to.
Around numbers and stuff, and policing too, from Mr. Willing, about on the harbour. With the rules about 10 people in a home, but 50 people outdoors, what does that mean for boats? And people on the northern beaches, lots of them would have boats and have the ability to get on boats and go into the harbour. Are they allowed to? Can they do it with 5 people? What are the rules, and how will it be policed?
Well, there's various information on the New South Wales website on how to do that. But as the health advice says, please limit your activity. If you don't have to do a certain activity, that includes boating, don't do it. Obviously, it's a time when people want to be with their closest, with their loved ones, and we just ask everybody to be responsible, but we also ask everybody not to undertake any non-essential activity, and we just ask people to turn their attention to that. I will ask the Assistant Commissioner to make some more comments on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. Obviously, we expect that there will be boats on the harbour over New Year's Eve. The Marine Area Command will have resources on the harbour like they would every other New Year's Eve to enforce marine laws and including the health orders as well. So at this point, we'll see what happens, but we have enough resources to deal with anything that comes. So. Common sense should prevail on it, and at the end of the day too, we want to ensure that people are not putting themselves at risk, particularly COVID risk, by acting inappropriately, by gathering in ways that could cause them harm. So we'll have sufficient resources on the ground to deal with it.
Just in terms of policing, there's lots of foreshore areas, around almost little parks everywhere. Would police be targeting those areas on patrols on New Year's Eve?
Of course, like we would any other time, local area commanders or police area commanders have established forward commands. We have the flexibility to move resources around between commands to deal with anything that arises. So, we expect that people would display some common sense and not turn up in areas in breach of the public health order. So, but again, we'll have resources that are flexible, that can be moved around to deal with any crowds that may deal.
Count on how many police are going to be required?
There are some areas, some parks that are fenced off, and it's pretty clear you can't go in there.
Yep.
But there are other parks that have been closed by local councils. They just have a sign up saying park will be closed for New Year's Eve. Will police be moving anyone on from those areas that turns up to those parks?
Well, look, in terms of the closures of those parks, they're matters for local government, but police will have resources to attend any location where people are gathering unsafe numbers. So, again, we anticipate that people will be out and about, but as you've heard from Dr. Chanthe and the Premier, we're asking people to restrict their movements. But police will be able to respond to anything that arises.
Local councils obviously don't have the move-on power that police have. So if people turn up to a park that is closed but physically open, what happens to them?
We'll be encouraging them to leave. We have powers. We have been working with local government for some time now to establish plans for those areas.
Premier, can I ask you again about cricket? I don't mean this to come across as parochial, but just from a position of logic. The best contact tracers and health department of the country, in terms of the way we perform through COVID, have said that 50% capacity is COVID safe. The cricket players are in a bubble and they're advised to behave in a responsible way. Should New South Wales be held to ransom by Queensland saying we don't want you there, why do you believe that the test should be taken away from Queensland if they want to turn the players away?
That's an option that Cricket Australia should consider, frankly. We've worked very closely with Cricket Australia and they've been really, really great to work with, and they've given us the same feedback. But we're at the behest of other state governments, and I've said from the outset that every response has to be proportionate to the risk, and we're doing everything we can, Aaron. We feel we have. And again, it's out of our hands. It's really up to what the Queensland government determines. But I'm hoping Cricket Australia will consider all their options, and we'd love to see more events in a COVID-safe way in Sydney. As Dr. Chan and the health experts often say, an outdoor ticketed seated event is much safer than an indoor event, and in fact, so long as it's done with the appropriate COVID safe plans, there's no reason why we can't have obviously reduced capacity, but a COVID safe event, and I'm hoping that that's what will eventuate. But again, we'll know in the next couple of hours.
It's not the fans heading north over the border, it's the players who are already in a bubble. So how over the top is that?
Well, that is
I think, again, I don't want to appear to be too parochial myself, but the overreaction in relation to some parts of dealing with the pandemic from other state premiers, I think, is evident, and this is another example when everybody is doing their best to maintain a COVID safe environment. Some reactions from some premiers, I think, is too over the top.
The Federal Immigration Minister has made some comments today about temporary visa holders should be perhaps deported if they're caught breaching public health orders. Is that something that you would be supportive of?
I'm not sure to what extent the federal government's proceeding down that path, but we would, that's a matter for them, and we would support whatever decision they thought was appropriate.
Can I ask you on that wedding that was held at Piedmont? Do you understand it was members of the bride and groom's family? Was it broader guests? Who was involved in breaking those rules?
That's currently under investigation. There's been 12 infringement notices that have been issued at this point. There will be more that will be issued over coming days, but that matter is currently under investigation, and that's all part of it. And we're trying to work out who it was that was there, and obviously the bride and groom were involved in it, and again, that's subject to further investigation.
Do you believe the bride and groom were also from the Northern Beaches?
I believe so.
What do you say about that? People obviously would be aware of the orders. They have this wedding. Do they just need to make this sacrifice and not have the wedding?
The community by and large has made great sacrifices over a considerable period of time, and as the Premier said, that's the type of behaviour that we're trying to discourage. We don't want to put people at risk by acting in a way that would expose others to the virus. So, it's inappropriate behaviour. We've seen it before, but it is the minority. The vast majority of people have been abiding by the current health orders, and we're asking that continues.
Is it 1 per 4 square metre on a boat? Is that what you said?
Dr. Chino will clarify that for me to make sure it's right.
So just to be clear that if you're in the northern beaches area of the northern zone, it still is related to the limit that you can get together for outdoor recreation. And again, all those people have to be within the northern zone. In terms of the southern zone, it's 10. For the general broader community, there's 50 outdoor gathering rule. But what we want is people to apply common sense. Clearly, under the deck, if you've got a vessel that is totally you can't go, hasn't got a cabin, that's a safer environment you're out in there. Where the ideal is that you limit it to your immediate household group. That is the safest, because being outdoors is a lower risk than the activities you might have in your house on New Year's Eve. So please, that's safe. We are asking you to use space yourself. The other key controls is don't go out if you've got any symptoms. Please check our website in case we've updated any venues that you might have inadvertently visited. And please take those precautions. Social distancing wherever you can. But keeping household groups together at this time of year is going to keep us all safe.
And Dr. Chanthe, do we have a number on how many people have been exempted from hotel quarantine in New South Wales?
Look, I don't have that data to hand. If you'd like to put in that request around hotel exemptions, it is a very, very small number, and as I described, the range of reasons, including for end-of-life care and for some other compassionate reasons.
Sorry, just on healthcare, there's a number of, there's more than 100 active cases on the northern beaches, a lot in the north. Is there any stress on the health system up there in terms of, how many people are in I don't think there's many people in intensive care, but is the health system coping with that?
So just, and thank you so this was a question in relation to an update on the numbers. We're currently treating 122 COVID cases, none of whom are in intensive care. Most of the cases, 97%, are being treated in non-acute out-of-hospital care, including returned travellers in the special health accommodation. So that is pleasing, but we sometimes see a lag in presentations. Often the second week of illness onset delivers more health complications. So it is important that we don't take from that COVID is a mild disease. COVID can have tragic and devastating outcomes. We need to treat it with care.
Premier, there's been a backing by former premiers Kenneth Beattie, separate states, separate political parties. Maybe there should be a royal commission into how Australian states have fared, and basically, essentially a report card. Would you find that worthwhile?
Well, that's a matter for others. Our job at hand in New South Wales is to really focus on protecting our citizens and keeping the economy open. I've always allowed others to comment on what we are doing in New South Wales. It's not for us to comment on those matters, but we've always been very open and transparent, and one of the many things I've learnt during the pandemic is to be as open and as direct with the public as possible in relation to what we're experiencing, because providing the public with the greatest amount of information is helping us work together to really get on top of the virus. So I don't mind any inquiries. I don't mind anything people want to cast a light on New South Wales. We're proud of what we've done to date, but that's because our people have responded so favourably, and we just asked everybody to continue that, especially in relation to the rates of testing. We can't stress enough how important it is in the next few days, given what we've seen overnight, to have more people come forward.
It's not for others. You're the Premier of New South Wales. I mean, you must have an opinion on whether the Royal Commission would yield any value.
I'm not going to really talk about it. I suspect there'll be many calls for inquiries and other matters, and that's for others to determine. As far as we're concerned, we believe it's in the public interest to provide as much information as possible, and if there's a public interest in looking at things more closely at various parts of the pandemic, well, we're open to that. But I certainly don't want any resources in New South Wales, going anywhere apart from fighting the virus and keeping our economy open. So that's what our focus is. I don't want to waste any time doing anything else, frankly, at the moment. Our focus is keeping the community safe and keeping jobs and keeping the economy open and getting that balance right. And that will continue to be our focus.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.